Hello, everyone, and welcome to our module on personality disorders. All of us have what are known as personality traits. Personality traits are fixed patterns of behavior. They are a way by which we interact with the environment and the people around us. And importantly, a personality trait should cause no significant distress or impaired social functioning. So, for example, you or people you know may have positive traits, like they may be kind or confident. Some people have negative personality traits, like being lazy or rude. But in general, these traits are just part of who people are, and they do not cause significant distress or impaired function. And also, a personality trait is often something we're aware of. For example, many people know that I'm kind of a lazy person, or they know that I'm kind of a shy person, and this defines our personality traits. In contrast, a personality disorder is also a fixed pattern of behavior and also a fixed way of interacting with others and the environment. But in contrast to a trait, a personality disorder causes distress or impaired function. And this is what they're going to want you to know for the Step 1 exam. They may describe features of some of the personality disorders we'll talk about in this video. If it's not causing distress or impaired function, then it's probably a personality trait. In order to be a disorder, it has to cause the patient distress and it has to get in the way of their social functioning. Also, in contrast to a personality trait, many patients with personality disorders are unaware of the disorder and unaware of the behavior. Personality disorders are difficult to treat. We don't really understand what causes them, and they don't have effective therapies. They're described as enduring. And the way they come up in clinical practice is many patients with these disorders are difficult to interact with, so it can strain the doctor-patient relationship when you're trying to care for someone who has a personality disorder. You can think of personality disorders as clusters of behavior problems that tend to occur together and that cause distress and problems with social interactions. We don't understand exactly what causes these. Probably most of them are caused by some type of trauma the patient experienced as a child. They're difficult to treat. When they are treated, it's usually with behavioral therapy. There are a number of personality disorders. We'll go through them all in this video. They're generally broken up into 3 clusters. Cluster A disorders are called weird because patients display odd and eccentric behavior. There are 3 of these. The cluster B disorders are called wild because patients display dramatic, erratic behavior, and there are 4 of these. And then finally, the cluster C disorders are called wacky because patients have anxious and fearful behavior, and there are also 3 of these disorders. We'll start with paranoid personality disorder. In this disorder, patients display a deep-seated distrust of other, even family and friends. They are often guarded, they are often suspicious, and they struggle to build close relationships. And the hallmark ego defense of a paranoid personality disorder is projection. These patients often project onto others what they are feeling, and I talk about projection in the video on ego defenses, but these patients will have unacceptable thoughts and they will attribute those to others. So, for example, someone with a paranoid personality disorder may accuse their doctor of being suspicious of them and judging them and thinking bad things about them. That is projection, and that is often seen among patients who have paranoid personality disorder. Patients with schizoid personality disorder are patients that like to be alone. They choose social isolation. And I've bolded the word choose because these patients elect to be alone. It's not that they're afraid of something. They're actually being alone because they are just more comfortable in that manner. Later, we'll talk about patients who choose to be alone because they're afraid of something. That is a different disorder. Patients who have this personality disorder do not enjoy close relationships. They have little or no interest in sexual experiences. They usually have few or no pleasure activities like hobbies. They don't have a lot of close friends. They're detached and they have a flat affect. And this is a man sitting by himself who's the kind of person who could have schizoid personality disorder. Maybe in high school, you knew kids that were very reclusive and just didn't spend much time with friends. Some of those people may have had schizoid personality disorder. Schizotypal personality disorder involves a fear of social interaction and few close friends, but the hallmark of this disorder, and the way you can always recognize it in a board question, is that these patients have odd beliefs or magical thinking. So they're often superstitious. These people may believe in telepathy or a sixth sense. If you see a description of someone like this, you should think of this personality disorder. They're not psychotic. They're not hallucinating like someone with psychosis. They just have a lot of weird, strange beliefs. They also often have ideas of reference. They believe events and happenings are somehow related to them. This type of person might believe that certain things happening in politics are happening because of something that they are doing. But a key distinction from psychotic disorders is that these patients are open to challenges to beliefs. So they might reconsider their superstitions if you challenge them. And this is different from delusions, which are fixed beliefs that you can see in patients with schizophrenia. And as I said before, in addition, these patients have no hallucinations or cognitive impairment, which are all the hallmarks of schizophrenia. They just are kind of odd and have odd beliefs and magical thinking. And once again, in a board question, someone who's superstitious and believes in bizarre things is probably someone who has schizotypal disorder. Moving on, antisocial personality disorder is basically lots of people who end up in jail. That's why I put this picture on the screen here. This is common in men. Patients with this personality disorder have a disregard for the rights of others. They often break the law. They are impulsive and they lack remorse. And like I said before, many patients with this personality disorder end up getting arrested or sent to jail. Now, if this occurs in a child less than 18 years of age, this is called conduct disorder. And 25% of girls and 40% of boys who have conduct disorder will go on to develop antisocial personality disorder when they become adults. In order to make this diagnosis, the patient must be at least 18 years old, and they must have evidence of conduct disorder before 15. So in other words, they may not have come to medical attention before age 15, but when you talk to them about things they did as a child, they will say that when they were 12 or 13 years old, they did things that met criteria for conduct disorder. And I talk about conduct disorder in the video on childhood psychiatric disorders. Borderline personality disorder gets its name because years ago, people thought that these patients had borderline features of schizophrenia. That's really not helpful in remembering the symptoms. What you want to remember about this disorder is that it's more common in women, and the hallmark is unstable personal relationships. So patients who have borderline personality disorder always have great friends, and then a day later, they hate the same person, okay? All people are very good or very bad. They have stormy relationships. They're often breaking up and getting back together with boyfriends. They may say, my boyfriend is the greatest guy in the world, and then next time you see him, they say, my boyfriend is the devil. They have an intense fear of abandonment. This drives a lot of their behaviors, and they sometimes accuse others of abandoning them. And this is part of why their relationships can be so hot and cold. They can really like someone, and then they can feel like that person is abandoning them, and they can suddenly change their tune and become totally mad at someone. And this can be a big problem if you're trying to treat a patient who has this disorder. Other features of borderline personality disorder are shown in this slide. These patients are impulsive. They may go on spending sprees or have sex with strangers or drive recklessly. They can sometimes self-mutilate. Some of these patients cut themselves or burn themselves, and they often have suicide gestures or attempts. This is related to their fear of abandonment. They'll say, you don't care about me, so I'm going to kill myself. They usually don't follow through and actually kill themselves, but they make very dramatic gestures or attempts in order to get attention and show other people how they feel about them. A major defense mechanism among patients with borderline personality disorder is what's known as splitting. Splitting refers to black and white thinking, sort of always never thinking. These patients cannot hold opposing views. So like I told you before, everyone is either the best person in the world or the worst person in the world. There basically is no in between. And this can be a problem if you're their doctor, because some days they'll see you and they'll say, oh, I'm so glad to see you. You're the best doctor in the world. And another time they'll see you and they'll say, I'm furious with you. You're the worst doctor I've ever had. You don't do anything right. And this is a big problem because all people, all things, all events in the world are often treated by patients with borderline disorder as wonderful or horrible, and that's called splitting. Now, I told you before that in general, personality disorders are difficult to treat, but when they are treated, they're usually treated with behavioral therapy from a psychotherapist. But there is one specific therapy you should be familiar with for step one, and that's called dialectical behavioral therapy. This is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy. It was initially designed to treat patients who are chronically suicidal, and it's now the gold standard for treatment of borderline personality disorder. The word dialectic means to discuss opposing views. So basically what happens in this type of behavioral therapy is the patient and the therapist meet weekly for 1 to 2 years. Sometimes there are group sessions, and they discuss different ways to look at the world and different points of view. They talk about things like mindfulness, how to tolerate distress, how to regulate emotions. It's not important that you know all the details of this therapy. It takes specialized training, but you should be aware that dialectical behavioral therapy is the gold standard for treatment of borderline personality disorder. People with histrionic personality disorder want to be the center of attention. So this is the kind of person you may see at a party who's talking loudly, telling wild stories, using hand gestures, trying to get everyone around them to look at them. Often these patients are women, and they will engage in inappropriate sexually provocative behavior. They may wear provocative clothing. They may touch other people frequently. They're also very concerned with physical appearance. They focus a lot on their outfits, and they wear exotic outfits, shoes, and hats. This is a person with histrionic personality disorder. Patients with narcissistic personality disorder have an inflated sense of self. They brag and they think everything that they do is great. They also tend to lack empathy for others. This is because of their inflated sense of self. They view other people as competitors, so they don't want to point out that someone else is doing something good because that might challenge their inflated sense of self. They want to hear that they're great all the time, and if you criticize them, they will overreact with anger and rage. Avoidant personality disorder is just like the name implies. Patients who have this condition avoid social interactions. They are often said to be socially inhibited or to display social inhibition. The reason these patients like to be alone and avoid social interactions is because they feel inadequate. They are afraid. They're afraid to interact with other people because they think people won't like them or they think that they'll be embarrassed. They struggle with intimate relationships. They think things like maybe he or she doesn't like me, so it's hard for them to get close to others. And importantly, you should contrast this disorder with schizoid, which we talked about earlier. Those patients like to be alone. They just prefer to be alone. They are aloof. Patients who have avoidant personality disorder want to socialize, but they cannot. And this is important for you to recognize in board questions. If they describe someone who is afraid to go out in public, that is probably someone with avoidant disorder. If they describe someone who just likes to be alone and doesn't have many close friends, that person likely has schizoid disorder. If you want to understand obsessive compulsive personality disorder, just look at the people in your med school class or maybe even at yourself. Most medical students display some features of obsessive compulsive personality disorder. These people are preoccupied with order and control. They love to-do lists and they always need a plan. They are inflexible at work or in relationships because they always want things done just so. And importantly, the behaviors that they engage in compulsively help to achieve their goals. And this is in contrast to obsessive compulsive disorder. So a person who has OCD may engage in recurrent disorders like checking their watch or checking a doorknob. And this doesn't help them. It gets in the way of them doing things. A person who has obsessive compulsive personality disorder will engage in compulsions like making a to-do list and then checking items off. That is a compulsion that actually helps to achieve their goals, and that defines obsessive compulsive personality disorder and distinguishes it from obsessive compulsive disorder. Another way to look at this, and a way that is sometimes used in textbooks, is to look at it in terms of the ego. Remember that your ego mediates between your id, which is your desire, and the superego, which are rules in society. Behaviors that are ego-syntonic are behaviors that achieve goals of the ego. So, for example, if a person has obsessions and compulsions that are used to achieve their goals, this is called ego-syntonic. And this is what is seen in obsessive compulsive personality disorder. In contrast, ego-dystonic behaviors are behaviors that conflict with the goals of the ego. This is when obsessions or compulsions are barriers to goals. And this is what's seen in obsessive compulsive disorder. A person who is constantly checking the stove to make sure that it's turned off has a compulsion that is getting in the way of them achieving the goals of their ego. That is ego-dystonic behavior. And our last personality disorder is dependent personality disorder. These are patients who are clingy with low self-confidence and they struggle to care for themselves because they depend on others excessively. These are patients who are rarely alone. They're always in a long-term relationship. They have trouble making decisions on their own because they want someone else to tell them what to do, and they have difficulty expressing an opinion. You probably know people who have some of these features, but the features are more severe and more dysfunctional in a patient who has actual dependent personality disorder. And these are the type of patients who often end up in abusive relationships because they depend on their partner and are afraid to walk away from their partner because of low self-confidence. If their partner starts abusing them, they have trouble breaking off the relationship. And that concludes our video on personality disorders.